rigged electoral system, giving a monopoly of power to the dominant political class. Unconstitutional politicized wars, where the fundamental rights, such as the right to keep and bear arms, hangs by a thin thread of bureaucratic preferences and not by the chains of constitutional rights. I mean, what kind of a people are we that we put our fundamental right to keep and bear arms on the laps of 9 Supreme Court justices? And I'll bet you none of them have ever even discharged the firearm. And after the Heller decision comes down, we're clapping and everybody's so happy. And I'm asking myself, I live in an insane asylum. Why do we even respect what they have to say about this? It's a fundamental right. It's a fundamental right, regardless of what 5 people on the U.S. Supreme Court say. To reclaim our fundamental rights must be the national. To reclaim our fundamental rights, must the national government be altered, abolished? There's no question in my mind that we are either on or have reached the kingdom of serfdom. Yes, Jeffersonian principles are reemerging because a remnant of Americans continue to value liberty over tyranny as they did in 1776 and 1861. But the outcome is all but certain. These United States continue their slide into the vortex of unitary government, centralization. Will Americans continue to be cowed by the managerial elite, such as when the Department of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, said this about people like us, and I quote, right-wing extremism in the United States can be broadly divided into those groups, movements, and adherents that are mainly anti-government, rejecting federal authority in the favor of state or local authority, or rejecting government authority entirely. It may include groups and individuals that are dedicated to a single issue, such as opposition to abortion or immigration, end of quote. This is like the divine right of kings, that to challenge the king is treason. We have been categorized as un-American because we stand up for American principles and values. In other words, because we treasure our constitutional heritage and constitutional rights, we are classified as, quote, national security threats. In effect, domestic terrorists in waiting. Now, the public policy problems confronting the American people are numerous and complex. Economic, fiscal, cultural, and political are symptomatic of an underlying disease. That disease is the concentration of political power. Or specifically, the concentration of unaccountable political power. That's the real problem. Think about this. The United States of America, with its 50 states and approximately 300 million citizens, are supposedly represented in the nation's capital by 1 president, 535 legislators, and 9 judges. A law can be passed by a minimum of 269 people and the signature of 1 CEO. Law can also be made by 5 judges. But the vast majority of Americans cannot name 1 congressman, let alone how he votes on the issues critical to the constituents he presumably represents. It is an absurdity to claim that these United States come close to being a democratic republic. It is essentially a plutocracy at best, accruing tremendous amounts of power at the expense of individual liberty. Now, we don't have time to discuss how this sad state of affairs occurred, or has come to pass, but suffice it to say that the tendency toward centralized powers is as natural as water seeking its own level. It's what we refer to in political science as the iron law of oligarchy. It's a natural consequence of any organization that power decision-making will be centralized into a small group of individuals. The decentralization channels of the Constitution have this tendency in check for a time. but the Constitution is quickly becoming a dead letter. Justice Scalia already said in 2009, the Constitution is dead. It's finished. Game over. Lights out. Nobody respects the Constitution. When they make decisions based upon precedent, stare decisis, which is essentially what previous Supreme Court opinions are based upon. But there's this great tsunami of governmental control, and it's about to wash our liberties and prosperity away completely. So we have to turn our attention away from the symptoms and focus on the disease. We can no longer ignore the root of our problems. We must be realists, as unsettling as this might be. The United States government is no longer legitimate. It is consistently violating and disregarding the Constitution. To that extent, the United States government has become our enemy. Now, I'm certain that many, if not most, will find these sentiments to be shocking, if not treason. Let's turn to the Constitution about treason. Article 3, Section 3 defines treason as follows. Treason against these United States shall consist only in levying war against them being the states, or adhering to the states' enemies, giving them aid and comfort. End of quote. Defending the states against the crushing national debt and obligations, oppressive tax rates, the Supreme Court's social engineering of the American people is not treason, according to the Constitution. This is not, my sentiments are not an attack on the nation, but on its political functionaries, the plutocratic elite, who have made a mockery of the constitutional rule of law. It is standing with the framers of the Constitution against the centralization of power in the hands of such functionaries, which they realized was the greatest threat to liberty and prosperity. In short, if there is treason, it is treason against the constitutional rule of law by the political class running or ruining this country. Now, I have to make this clear because, as an academic, I'm familiar with the history of this country, going all the way back to the Alien Sedition Act of 1798, during the Adams administration. And if you challenge authority, they always pull out that treason card, or they pull out some statutory sedition law. So what I'm saying is not without its risk. But we know that the framers took those risks also, to a much more significant extent. These United States of America have been and continue to be transformed into a unitary system of government. This transformation of centralized power to the point that the U.S. government has extended its tentacles into virtually every aspect of our lives, in the pockets of generations not yet born. The framers said to tax posterity is one of the most unjust things a regime can do. Think about it. Is that taxation without representation? Yes. Generations not yet born have to bail this government out of the trillions of dollars of debt. When they look back upon this generation, they're not going to be writing a book, The Greatest Generation, that's for certain. They're the most selfish generation. It matters not whether the politics of intrusion stems from the legislative, executive, or judicial branch. The fact of the matter is that those administrative institutions of government mask the elites, which have taken over the government in order to exercise real power to their own personal and collective